is our progress to date? Well, in terms of the collecting, we had proposed to collect several hundred collections of green algae from around the Hawaiian Islands. Right now we have 219 field collections to date. These have been collected from a whole series of different islands: Hawaii, Oahu, Molokai, Lanai, Maui, and Hawaii. We've done all of our inter-island collecting right now. We've also obtained a series of collections from the Census of Marine Life expedition to French frigate shoals. So they've allowed us to use their specimens as well in this analysis. The second half of our proposal included going to Bishop Museum and having a look at the specimens that were there. The reason we wanted to do that is because a lot of the archive specimens at Bishop Museum have been expertly identified. Okay, so there are accessions in there that have the taxonomic seal of approval from people who are taxonomic experts in those particular groups. We figured that that was probably the best way to go and get a good concept of what these species really are in Hawaii. So we have a partnership with the staff of Bishop Museum, and they very kindly allow us to extract DNA from a series of these specimens. We're using this to flesh out the second half of our framework. Now, to date, we have 90 collections from these Bishop Museum accessions, and we're going to be continuing this over the next several months to finish off our work over there. In terms of vouchers, we recognize the importance of maintaining our morphological vouchers for each of these samples that we're collecting. This will allow us to go back at any point in time to see what it was morphologically that we ground up in the end to use for DNA work. So it's really important to keep these. We're underway with our herbarium sheet photography. So each of the specimens that we collect, we make into herbarium vouchers, and these is also complete for Bishop Museum specimens. All of these photographs will be compiled together at the end of the project and put into a project database, which will also be accessible over the internet. So people will be able to see all these different specimens that we're working at, and also look at the DNA sequences that we obtained from them. PCR and sequencing. All 219 collections, field collections, have been PCR'd for the plastid marker at least once, and to date we have 76 consensus sequences put together for these different green algae. We've done a lot of troubleshooting to redesign the plaster primers for the green algae to hopefully increase the success rate for this marker. And we have confirmed the choice for our second marker, that is the nuclear ITS. This is just to show you really quickly what's the approach that we take in trying to redesign these primers for the green algae. I put together all the sequences that I had, here's just a subset of them, for different organisms in that universally amplified region. What we're doing is looking at an alignment of the DNA sequences. And you can see here what I've done is identified a region for the green algae that's a little bit different than what we see for the other algae, but it's very consistent within the green algae. So it's a specialized priming region that should only work for the greens. And in fact, it has helped us out a lot in terms of our success. Here's an example of how we undertake these reactions. We usually do a couple of different markers at once. We run these side by side in the lab. It gives us an idea of, number one, the DNA extraction quality. Not all green algae extract really well. Some of them have secondary compounds in them that can inhibit your PCR reactions. And it's important for us to know if something isn't working just because the extract itself wasn't good, maybe the specimen wasn't preserved well, maybe there's something else inhibiting it, or maybe there's something wrong with one set of primers but not the other. So having this side-by-side comparison allows us to go right down the line and see, did this work for one or for both of the different markers that we're trying to do at the same time. So here you can see where I have the red X's. You can see in both cases here, these extracts didn't work for either one of the markers, at least very well. So in that case, we're relatively certain that either the sample was not processed correctly or there's something inhibiting that PCR reaction. We need to go back and clean up those extracts a little bit. Where are we to date in terms of our plastid marker results? We mentioned we have 76 plastid marker sequences right now for the green algae. These are all over the green algal tree for the Hawaiian Islands, so they're not specialized in one particular group at the moment. But just to give you a very brief idea of how we can use this and the sort of hints that it gives us for where to take this work in the future, here are some of the sequences that we have for the genus Podium. And what you can see here is we have things in several groups. We have Podium edulae up here. We also have Podium edulae down here. We have Podium reedii down here, and there's one sequence right here. So what this means is, number one, we need more samples of these to add in to see whether or not we're retaining these multiple groups for single species. We also need to go back and re-examine the vouchers to make sure they were identified correctly based on morphology. But people who are doing similar studies to this all over the world, and I've seen this at some recent conferences, are coming up with large numbers of cryptic speciation occurring in relatively well-studied floras. I'm excited because I think this means that there's a good opportunity, there's a good possibility that there are a lot more species here in Hawaii than we've been able to see so far based on the morphology. Here's our approach and how it will be modified. We were collecting representatives of all known green algal species, aiming for a total of 330 specimens that we should have by the end of the project. As I mentioned, we have completed our inter-island trips, so that part of the project is finished at this point. We're still working on most of these other aspects. We're attempting to sample 2 herbarium sheet accessions for each of the species. We're partway there. We'll finish this off in the next couple of months. And then sequencing these markers for as many of these collections as possible to construct our sequence framework. We're going to be adding new accessions as they are sequenced and using this to reevaluate the framework as we go. We're going to be assessing the success of identifying unknown sequences with known sequences by adding multiple accessions of individual species. So what that means is as we are able to collect more and more samples and put them into the framework, we'll be able to assess it against things that are already identified to come up with an idea of how successful we are with this framework for identifying species. Here's the second part of what we're doing. We're going to be constructing our internet accessible database. Now this in fact is constructed already, but it's being done through another project. It isn't released yet, and it's going to probably take until the end of the year or so to have this ready for people to look at. But it is up and ready, and we're able to put our data in as an organizational tool within the lab at this point. We're going to be showcasing analyzed samples through this database and providing access to the DNA sequence data. What we'd also like to do is to provide background information to resource managers on our molecular tools that we're using in the lab to show how they will be very useful in the future for the reasons that I showed you right at the beginning of the talk. Within 1 to 2 weeks, we're going to have an informational brochure that's ready to be distributed to all the resource managers around the islands, and we'll be contacting each of you to speak in more detail about this project. We're going to be starting this fall a pilot project service where we're going to be analyzing samples that are sent in or brought in by members of the community so we can add these into the framework and evaluate the success of our molecular identification. Project goals and timeline. This has been revised a little bit. We had some glitches in the central part of this year, as a lot of you probably had as well, with the funding uncertainty. What we originally proposed was to conduct all of our inter-island field work in this first part, in this first 4 months of the year, as well as completing all the Bishop Museum work and sequencing these markers. We're still in the sampling of the Bishop Museum part right now, and that'll be ongoing through the fall. We'll be continuing to sequence our plasmid and nuclear markers over the next few months. And as well, we've moved the construction of the project website and the database to this fall semester. So we'll be completing that over the next 4 months as well. But we do anticipate everything ending on time, and we will be wrapping up the project December with our final report in January. Okay. Thank you so much for your time. I'm happy to answer any questions you have.